I maybe get caught in the weeds sometimes of like stats and numbers and things like that. And those are good to tell a story, but ultimately, like, if the story's not relatable or doesn't kind of reveal something about either the human condition or something that, we can relate to in our own lives, then it loses some of the impact. Obviously it's great watching, Cameron Young, but I think what really makes it human is the fact that, like, Cameron Young last spring was worried about losing his job. And so I think everyone loves to see a story where a guy goes from rock bottom or maybe a trough in his career to a peak. We love that comeback story, seeing him and his kids together, and the kids, they were more impressed by the drone maybe than the trophy. And I think people as a parent love that side of it. So I think ultimately, like, great storytelling transcends platforms, which sounds like a really cheesy slogan to some sort of conference that, maybe we could host, but I think it is true.
Sean Martin on the Content Clubhouse podcast, or Smartin as he's better known in professional golf circles. Some are saying he's the most sought after podcast guest in the sport between No Laying Up, Normal Sport, Fried Egg. Sean, thank you for making some time for what may not be the last stop on your podcast tour, but it will almost certainly be the least.
I would be lying if I said that there weren't people at work that called me America's podcast guest. Which is, I guess, the best alternative to not having a podcast. And also you don't have to do all the work as far as production, post-production. But this is my last known booking. So, nothing booked after this. So let's make it a good one.
There we go. Glad to be the closer. You mentioned work. So for those that are not familiar with you, you're the senior manager of content development at the PGA Tour. And we don't do a ton. I say we. I'm the only one who does anything related to this podcast. We do not have a crew. But I say I don't do a ton of pro golf talk on this particular podcast, but just because there's far better places for listeners to get their fix on that than listening to me talk about it. But it would seem to me a waste of your talents not to at least briefly touch on the all caps PGA Tour who you work for. So we're recording a couple of days after the Players Championship, the headline event for the tour, in a week that I know is quite hectic for you and the rest of the staff down in Ponte Vedra. So just curious, what was last week like for you through your perspective?
Hectic is definitely a good way to put it. A variety of things. Obviously, Chasing Sunday has just come out. Hopefully people have watched it if they haven't. It's on the PGA Tour's YouTube, but it's kind of golf version of Hard Knocks, partnership with PGA Tour Studios and NFL Films. And I mean, a total team effort and a total just kind of controlled chaos to get to that point. We had 4 of our talented directors in the field following our 4 characters. They were mic'd up for all 4 rounds, so unprecedented access. They got amazing sound you get player caddy conversations, walking through shots. You get an amazing Jordan Spieth moment where the full Spieth mind is on display as he talks about the tee shot at 18 at TPC Sawgrass, but then you get guys talking about what they're going to eat next, and just really entertaining conversations that show the character of the players as well. So that was a big bulk of the time for myself, and really dozens of people between PGA Tour Studios, NFL Films, both those who came on site at TPC Sawgrass and those back at headquarters for them. So that was the highlight definitely of that week. Also, if you caught the flock of 50 people dressed like Will Ferrell's character in his upcoming Netflix comedy, I was also responsible for shepherding and producing that crew, which was a new experience outside my comfort zone, I would say. So, it was an eventful week for sure.
Yeah, that it reminded me the Will Ferrell bit of the let him cook guys with the Lululemon and all that at the Waste Management. Although
the following Minwoo, we definitely cited that a few times. A couple social posts coming out around that as well. But yeah, that was part of it. And then also really part of it was a kind of post-produced social piece that's coming out. And it felt like quasi marketing activation, part commercial shoot in the midst of the players, which was kind of crazy.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the NFL Films thing, and I actually didn't really have this on my list of things to talk about, but it's actually really cool. I have not yet seen it, but we'll definitely get on that and remedy that. But like, what was... I mean, NFL Films, just headline it being involved in the PGA Tour. Obviously, Rolap has his background, but just like, what struck you about being different working with that crew or working on this project versus other content you've worked on with the PGA Tour?
I think the amount of collaboration. NFL Films obviously is a heavyweight in the business. Hard Knocks is a known franchise that's been around for years, but I think at PGA Tour Studios, we really like to think that we punch above our weight. We're super efficient. We cover golf, every week from Century in January until Thanksgiving. And, I think that really comes down a lot to our leadership under Michael Reisman. He really leads a passionate, energized, and efficient crew that cranks out everything from social posts to, a dozen network specials a year that appear on NBC and CBS. So it was new to me in the sense of kind of this role that I've had for the past year, being more on that video side. And I think seeing that side of things, I'm always amazed by the amount of collaboration. Like I tell people back in my old days as a writer, like you could tell me to write a book and I could do it myself. It might take years, but I could do it by myself. Whereas the things that, we do on the video side, from Chasing Sunday to network specials to even social posts, requires, many hands and sometimes dozens. And it's not something, if you told me to go, redo Scotty 24 and do it myself, like I could not do that no matter how much time you gave me. You need so many different people, so many different skill sets. And I think I always wondered why the credits were so long after films and things like that. And then you see it and you realize like the amount of hands it takes, the amount of teamwork it takes and coordination and logistics to make it happen. In addition to the artistic side, like never did I realize how important logistics were to content creation. Like you think about the creative act, the creative side, the camera people, the directors, but even just getting people in the right place, which again comes down to great leadership. I think I've really seen that in the last year.
You're totally right. That's a very unseen, again, until you get to the very long parts of the credits. And even, not even in the credits, but like the part where the music stops, like, where it's just, all right, we're rolling these names. But that's a really interesting way of looking at it. And I mean, a credit to you guys and that entire team for an awesome week and awesome content. And kind of last thing on the players before we kind of jump into you and your career and kind of how things have evolved in the golf space, just observing from afar this past week at Sawgrass, this seems like one of the best players' championships in recent memory. And I'm not nearly articulate enough to explain maybe why that might be. But if you would agree with that, or if you felt similarly from on site, what was different this year? Why was it so good?
I don't know that it was different, but I think that you really just had that moment where 16, 17, and 18 decided things. They kind of were in all their glory. It was like this glorious madness, if you will. I think that might be a callback to the Josh Elliott post that Tron Carter always references. But so DJ Pyhowski and I, we've known each other for a long time. He was an intern at Golf Week when I worked there. And then he was kind of the one that actually drew me over to the PGA Tour. And we were both at the 2015 Players, which was the Ricky Fowler year. Birdied 17 in regulation, birdied again in the playoff, and I think again in sudden death. And as I was walking down 17 following Cameron Young's group, him and Matthew Fitzpatrick, I had that same thought, and I almost texted DJ. I didn't have a chance to, but I thought this feels the same as that. And it's because 17 is this amazing amphitheater, maybe the best in the game, and it's deciding this great championship right now. And so I think that was why. I mean, I think 17 is obviously a hole that stands on its own. I think the setting is really unique. And I think that's the thing that you really get on site is you see the amphitheater around 17. It's not just the island green, but it's all that surrounds it that I think makes it what it is. And that was just raucous and cooking. And I think whenever 17 is really deciding the championship and then 18, I think that is a recipe for a great finish.
Yeah, it is just a great finishing stretch and just a great place to like enjoy golf. Again, I didn't go this year, but I've been in previous years and love to sit on that hill right behind 17 because you don't have to necessarily get there as early as kind of other places around that amphitheater. But yeah, Saturday afternoon or Sunday afternoon, there is really, really tough to beat. So yeah, all in all, a great week in golf. But to kind of dive in a bit more into the Sean Martin story here. So you touched briefly on your initial kind of start as a writer, being at Golf Week, going over to the PGA Tour. Again, I joked about your popularity as a podcast guest, but it comes from a real truth that is you're one of the best in the pro golf business in storytelling. You've been at it for 20 years, and in the history of a game that started in the 1400s or whatever, like 20 years really isn't that long of a time span. And yet so much of golf history and of evolution in the game has happened since you've been covering it in some form or fashion. And the way that we consume the game, you could argue, has changed more in those 20 years than it did in the 100 years previously. I'm just curious, to start, like, how have you observed that phenomenon kind of from your spot inside the ropes over the last 20 years?
I think you trying to put my career in context of the history of golf that dates back to like, shepherds and maybe some Dutchmen in a field or something really is makes me feel pretty minuscule, which is probably good. As for my career, I mean, I tell people like that we work with now, like I started in newspapers, and I think some people look at that as like, how are you still alive? You must be 95 years old. I mean, and honestly too, like we're hiring people where I'm honestly old enough now, getting close to like be their father. So that's a little bit weird. So I've seen a lot for sure. I mean, started in newspapers, now we're on to, YouTube and TikTok and Instagram. I think, this sounds cliche. People say all the time, like good storytelling remains the same, but I think it's true. Like, and I think it's something Kyle Porter does so well is the good storytelling is really like the human aspect of it. I maybe get caught in the weeds sometimes of like stats and numbers and things like that. And those are good to tell a story, but ultimately like if the story's not relatable or doesn't kind of reveal something about either the human condition or something that, we can relate to in our own lives, then it loses some of the impact. Obviously it's great watching, Cameron Young do what he did on 17 and 18, but I think what really makes it human is the fact that like Cameron Young last spring was worried about losing his job. And so I think everyone loves to see a story where a guy goes from, rock bottom or maybe a trough in his career to a peak. We love that comeback story. Seeing him and his kids together and the footage that our team in the field got of like the kids, they were more impressed by the drone maybe than the trophy. And I think people as a parent love that side of it. So I think ultimately like great storytelling transcends platforms, which sounds like a really cheesy slogan to some sort of conference that, maybe we could host, but I think it is true.
Yeah. Well, I'll one up you on cheesiness. I never thought I'd bring out a George R.R. Martin quote on this show, but
sure.
like his famous bit about, the only thing worth writing about is conflict within the human heart. And he may even be quoting some other author from that, but for the sake of this, I'll attribute it to him. But like, I think there's a real essence of that in sports as well. But to your excellent point about how that's changed, right? Going from newspapers, which still exists, I was not putting you in the grave just yet, but as you say, the job has certainly changed since you first started it. And you mentioned Kyle Porter, who I love as well. You were on his show recently, and I listened to you guys talking about, just how, yes, good storytelling always wins out, and that hasn't necessarily drastically changed, but I think it has evolved in its own way. You talked about when you first got started, again in newspapers, but then also websites and blogs were in their heyday, and now you've described, I think on Kyle's show, your Twitter as the closest thing you have to a blog now, and you've mentioned working much more in kind of video forward roles. Again, not to call you an old dog, but you've had to learn some new tricks, so to speak. I'm just like, how have you adapted to that?
That's a good question. I think the way things have transitioned has helped me because I think people demand more from their writing for sure. Like I always think about like O.B. Keeler following Bobby Jones, right? I mean, back then the articles that appeared in the Atlanta Journal, like that was the only way they knew what happened. So, O.B. Keeler simply describing the shots and how Bobby Jones shot 71 and how he won by a stroke, like that was all that they needed. That cut it. Like that was doing a service to the reader. In today's day and age, like where everything's on television more than ever, like I think back to when I was a kid, my parents got the New York Times, and for West Coast tournaments, like the scores had to be printed before the day's play was over. So it'd be like, hey, Tiger Woods was -3 through 15. Check Friday's or Saturday's paper for his Friday score, and to see the end of his Thursday score also. And so now, like with everything available instantaneously as far as like scores, and then Tourcast can show you how he did it. Now it's not just a 2-hour broadcast on Thursday, Friday, but like it's PGA Tour Live with his entire round on video. Like the storytelling needs to be deeper to make it worthwhile because the basics are covered everywhere. And so I think that has helped prepare me, I think, for the video side. I think because I see like the talented producers and directors around me in our team. And like, I think when I started doing video, I was really focused on the interviews and like what information I could get. And that's definitely part of the story, but they were really focused on like the creative ways to tell the story. Like, so it's not just, highlight soundbite, stage shot soundbite, and just that back and forth. But like they're telling the story in a really creative way, and I think I've seen that kind of like how when I'd write a feature it was the same, where like it's not just the information. Like having great information is definitely part of successful storytelling, but presenting it in the right way is part of it. And so I think that's something I've tried to carry over, and I'm learning from a lot of people on our team of what it takes to tell a good story, and not underselling and not maybe overemphasizing the information, but also making sure that it's told in an interesting way.
The way golf is covered, I think, is fascinating in the way that it's evolved. Specifically for that reason you just brought up, right? Of like in a different era of having to wait on the scores, or literally in the earliest forms of it, just purely describing what happened on the course because that's the only way anybody who wasn't there is going to know. That has obviously changed quite a bit. And one thing you brought up with Kyle that I thought was really interesting is even in your time of covering it, you describe the access to the players and just the way that the players interact with those covering them has changed dramatically over the last 20 years. I'm curious if you could just kind of expound upon that, and maybe why do you think it has changed, and is that change for the better?
I think that a big reason why it's changed is because they're just getting pulled in so many more directions. So like everyone talks about the Arnold Palmer and Bob Drum relationship. And, Arnold and Bob were basically friends. They spent a lot of time together. They eat meals together. But that's probably because there were 5-10 writers, maybe a few more, traveling and covering the PGA Tour in Arnold Palmer's day that were there week to week. And I think now there's definitely fewer people that they see on a consistent basis, and there's more outlets producing content. So I think players are getting pulled in more directions by people they may not know, because not only is like the quote unquote traditional media producing content about them, but also their sponsors are creating content, and the tournament's creating content, and the tour is creating content. And so they're just getting asked to do a lot of things. And frankly, a lot of those asks may be repetitive, because like the thing that their sponsor wants, the tour wants the same content, so they get asked the same questions. And so it's not like you just do one interview a day and that covers all your bases, but you see it when a guy goes through flash, we call it, after his round, and all the stops he has. Like a guy might finish the round, he plays well, he goes to, Golf Channel first, and Rex Hoggard interviews him, and then he may go to NBC next for the main telecast, and he gets interviewed there, and then he goes to Sky Sports for international, and then he goes to the writers. And each of those stops, like they need the same question answered for their own piece of content or their own broadcast. And so a player's like, man, why am I getting the same question 5 times? And it's because they all need that for their own content. And so I can see where I think for the players, it's hard a little bit of, you're not seeing the same faces. So that maybe that level of trust isn't built, and then you're getting asked similar questions quite often. And so that makes it harder, I think, for the players, because you're also like, well, where is this going? What's being done with it? I think also just kind of the era of like headline journalism, where one quote might get pulled out of a 45-minute podcast and made into a headline, makes people really defensive of, man, I could have this great interview, but if I say one thing the wrong way and it gets aggregated into a headline, I'm toast. And I think that puts them on their toes a little bit. So I think that's changed a lot. So I think it's harder for the player because of that, versus an environment where maybe you're seeing the same faces, you know them, they know you, you know where they're coming from, they know where you're coming from. I do think it is harder for the players for that reason.
And I don't guess there's any way of putting that toothpaste back in the tube, so to speak, or improving that? Probably
not. I mean, I think, ever since COVID, obviously, golf's undergone this amazing amount of growth, right? And so I think that just means there's more people in the space. And I think it's going to continue to grow. I think what the tour is doing, what Brian Rolap is doing, I mean, a lot of that is to, quote unquote, grow the game, or grow the tour at least, and make the product and make the competition more compelling, which would hypothetically, it means more eyeballs. So, I mean, especially I hope for our case of the tour and just for golf in general, that kind of that trajectory continues for sure.
In the ways that, golf is being covered, or in this case, not covered, one of the things I find really fascinating is comparing it to other sports, right? And there's not enough hours in the day to listen to every podcast out there, much less even this one. But you see other athletes like a Tom Brady or, basically any NBA player, it seems, has their own podcast, has their own something, has their own, or at least at the bare minimum through their own social channels, are now kind of retaking control of that storytelling, right? And correct me, you would be much better positioned to answer this than me, but like outside Bryson, it doesn't really sound like too many people in golf are doing that. And even for Bryson's sake, I don't even know that he's really storytelling is what he's after. I don't know what he's after, to be quite honest with you, but I don't know. Why do you think that hasn't taken off quite as much in golf? Are golfers in any way less interested in doing that?
I think one thing that's difficult is the length of the careers. So like a football player might be done by 35 and he's looking for something else to do. I mean, you look at Justin Rose, he's 45 and he's still competing at a world-class level. And then of course there's, PGA Tour champions. And so guys are still competing there. So I think part of it is that at the age where guys in other sports are looking for something to do in a second act to their career and they go into media, I think golfers are still playing golf. Then you look at kind of the length of the season and really that it's kind of a choose your own adventure of, there's golf tournaments to play all year round and you may change your mind when to play. 1 week, you may skip 1 week because you're not feeling well. You may add a week because you're feeling good and you want to keep going, or you need another week of preparation before a major or something like that. So I think the unpredictability of their own schedule, the length of the schedule, and then just the length of the career makes it a little harder for golfers to get into media. You look at Kevin Kisner's been on NBC, obviously, and doing stuff with Barstool now, and that's a guy who, his career kind of, for better or worse, has come to an end in his early 40s, but the voices that you'd want to hear from, you see great players. You look at baseball, like Clayton Kershaw is going straight into MLB broadcasting. A golfer of Clayton Kershaw's caliber is still competing into his 40s and 50s, and so he's not going to do broadcasting, whereas in baseball, Kershaw's career is over at, I don't know, probably 35, and now he has time on his hand.
But even I'm a big Georgia, football sports fan as a proud graduate. Yeah. But even like our guys on the team, they're hosting a podcast too. Like guys who are very much still in the thick of their careers. And for whatever reason, I mean, that kind of surprised me when it started, but for whatever reason, I cannot imagine a golfer doing that. But I don't know why that is.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I'm not really sure. I don't know if maybe part of it's the amount of travel too, where like a UGA football player is on the road 6-7 weeks a year. And even then, I don't know when they leave, probably Thursday for a game and come back Monday or Sunday.
And not to mention not going to class either. So
sure. Well, I mean, that's your claim. I don't want to step into that. But I've got to think part of it too is just maybe the amount of time not at home. Definitely could be part of it as well.
To that end, is there from your perspective, like if we were to find out tomorrow, like, oh wow, player X is gonna do like a weekly radio hit a la Aaron Rodgers and Pat McAfee show or whoever, like personally, who would get you fired up to see that? Oh my gosh, I'd listen to that every week.
I think the first answer, I think is Spieth. Just open a vein every week and just talk about, what he's going through. I think he's the obvious answer, but because I think we do, as much as I think we appreciate the ups and downs. It goes back to that relatability. I think, especially to you can just see that there's a lot of thought going in there. I always like listening to Podrick Harrington talk about the game for the same reason. There's a lot of thought and introspection. So I think the overthinkers who are the people that probably golf tortures the most, because golf is it's made to overthink because the ball is kind of stationary. So hypothetically, you have as much time as you want to get ready for the shot. Like there's nothing to react to. You decide within reason. You decide when you start and when you finish. So I think that those are usually the tortured souls of golf, and I think those are the people that really kind of interest me because I want to hear them open a vein on what they're going through.
Yeah, his line about like, have you ever played golf, in response to that? I can't remember if that was last week or if that was Bay Hill or what, but just like never felt more seen and showing that. Yeah,
Victor Hovland fits in that boat as well. I think even he had a quote in Valspar this week that he was like half joking, but he's like, "Oh, I'm a deeply unhappy person," and I could see that. Like it feels like he's constantly discontent with his swing. Like that's his baseline is he's unhappy with his game. So hearing what he, just that journey would definitely be interesting for sure.
Well, and those kind of sound biteable moments, like you just mentioned with Victor and like with Spieth. I mean, again, so much of the way, especially people of now my generation, but all of us really, like that's how we're getting so much of our storytelling, or if you can even call it that, but at least our consumption of the game now. A lot of it is so much in these bite-sized pieces. And you mentioned, perhaps the nervousness or apprehension on the part of the player to work with media in some circumstances because of that. 10 seconds of a 45-minute podcast can be taken out of context, and that really got me thinking. Are you familiar with Gary Vee?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I admittedly haven't consumed a ton of his content, but like he has this quip that's like basically we've evolved past social media now. We're now in what he calls interest media, and prioritizing attention, right? You're being fed what you're interested in, not necessarily, the news or other things that may have previously showed up on your feeds. How do you, as somebody who again is still fighting the good fight and pursuing good, honest storytelling, how have you felt that shift in what you see and consume, and how do you combat that interest media, so to speak, in the way you tell your stories?
I definitely think that like it's more about spectacle now, because you have to kind of break through the noise. So, and I've caught myself on Twitter, like there's a temptation because of the algorithm to maybe not sensationalize, but like you know what's going to do well, and like a pretty neutral piece of information isn't really it. So like there's the temptation to add an exclamation point, say this is the best or worst thing ever, take an extreme stance, because a middle of the road stance isn't going to cut it when it comes to the algorithm. So, and then like on YouTube, you see it with YouTube golf, which I think is a good thing, don't get me wrong, but like it's not a 15-minute, well thought out monologue on the latest golf news is going to get buried under, let's say, Bryson trying to hit shots over his house. And so it is about, even like you look at Netflix's strategy where they admit like they're looking at like eventizing things. Something has to be an event, versus they're more interested in that than like a full season of buying rights to a sports league's full season. So even like your tweet, I almost feel like your tweets have to be eventized, and it's hard because you want to tell truth, you want to be accurate, you want to do it in the appropriate way, but like also, I mean, at least I find myself getting caught of like you want it to perform well. It's nice when your tweets perform well. So I think sometimes I guess either tempering expectations or maybe finding the middle road, or just I don't know. I don't know that I have a great answer, but I definitely find myself, even in things I write on Twitter, like wanting to take an extreme stance, calling it the best or worst ever, or calling it amazing when maybe it's not amazing. Maybe it's pretty standard. And so it is a hard pull because there is a temptation to make everything a spectacle.
Well, how do you measure, I guess, success in a healthy way then? Because you're right. Like if you're living and dying, man, by that view count and that like count, which is so easy to do, which I think any and all of us have taken too much stock of that at one point. But as you say, it's not a fair reflection of what is or isn't good storytelling. I guess, how do you... Well,
I do think it is a good, it is a good reflection, I think, because I mean, you can go on one end where you can be a total artist and it's like, look, I'm going to do my art, whether anyone else consumes it. I'm indifferent. I don't care. And that is a life and maybe a luxury that some people choose, of like, look, I'm going to write what I want to write the way I want to write it. If nobody reads it, that's fine. Then that confronts the day-to-day realities of running a business. And so if you want to do it for a living and you need to actually make a living off of it, then you do need to be concerned with views and engagements and things like that. So I don't want to, I'm not going to totally dismiss those numbers. I agree. They can probably impact the way you tell stories, but that's not necessarily a bad thing too, because for most of us, this is a business. It's a way, we make money. It's a way that our companies make money. And so we should be tailoring what we do to be seen. Otherwise, if a tree falls in the woods, nobody hears it, then did it really fall and did your content really matter? So I think it can go too far if you. I mean, yes, if you did a good job and it didn't get viewed, if your identity is tied up in that, where you're like, oh, I'm bad at my job, or I'm because of this one thing failed, I think that can be unhealthy. Because I do think part of learning and trying new things means failing. So I do think if you're only going to if you're never going to fail, you're going to play it safe and just kind of play into a formulaic way of storytelling. So I do think that it can be unhealthy then. But they are necessary metrics, unfortunately, because we are, I think most of us doing it, as a business or to make money. And so we have to be concerned with those things.
Well, at the end of the day, like sports, ultimately you play to win, right? I mean, if we're not trying to win, what are we doing here?
Right.
So, I think that's wise. That's pretty spot on. But before I get you out of here, you mentioned the word metric, so immediately that's where my brain goes. You are, again, known as a treasure trove of golf information, data, analytics, the whole nine. What's a stat? I know we're heading into Valspar week, and honestly, by the time this comes out, Valspar will have come and gone. But be it related to this week, be it related to something you're working on, what kind of numbers are you crunching these days? What's a stat you've been thinking about as we kind of near the prime of the golf season here?
I spend way less time on numbers than I used to. I mean, I used to dive deep into Excel and have spreadsheets and all this stuff, and it's like a poor man's Justin, like an impoverished man's Justin Ray, or a bankrupt man Justin Ray. But I don't really have time for that as much anymore. I wish I did. I don't have a great number I can pull, off the top of my head here. I wish I did, but I think one that I always go back to when I get asked for like a favorite nugget is always the Tiger Woods was the reigning U.S. amateur champion when he won the Masters by 12. So it'd be akin to like Mason Howell going to Augusta right now and winning by 12, which, I mean, he's still in high school, so that's crazy in its own right. But that's always a favorite of mine because I think because of what Tiger did so quickly and the amount of times he won and just the like rapid pace with which he just overtook the golf world and became like the only story, I think we forget that he also, was the reigning U.S. amateur champion.
Very cool. Well, in lieu of any numbers, what's something that, again, I know you guys are constantly, working on stuff over down at, are you in the P-Gate office down there? Is that the new fancy building?
P-Gate's the old name. We are now PGA TOUR Studios.
Gotcha.
That's the new name next to the Global Home. Amazing facility.
Yeah.
Well,
what's something people can be, you mentioned the documentary from the Players Championship, but anything else that you're excited about kind of as the season gets going, people can be looking forward to?
We have a network special coming out mid-April. April 19th, I believe, is the date. It's celebrating Tiger's 30 years as a pro, and it's the story is only done through previous sit-down interviews we've done with Tiger. So it's basically Tiger telling his story in his own words. And it's ambitious. I think it's kind of experimenting the way we kind of talked about, where some people may think it's amazing, some people may not like it. But I think that it was definitely taking a swing, trying something new. And I think even just seeing old Tiger and his mannerisms, or I should say young Tiger and his mannerisms, and the way he developed over the years, I think seeing the way some of his answers stayed the same over 30 years and some of the ways they differed, I think is really amazing. But I do think you see the evolution, even just in as similar sound bites come from across the years. You see a very different Tiger over the years. So I think that's being led by Colin Brown and our team, and I think that I'm really excited about it. It was an amazing dig, especially by him, just digging through our archives. Another idea that originated from our leader, Michael Reisman, but I'm excited for it. I think it just shows the depth of our archive, which I think as a team we're really proud of. Like, we sat down with Tiger almost every year of his career, sometimes multiple times, and especially like in 97 through, I would say 05, maybe a little earlier. Like, he sat down with us multiple times a year. And so there's stories in there that like I've never heard. And I feel like I've read everything there is about Tiger. So that to me is really cool when even now in 2026, we have maybe not untold Tiger stories, maybe forgotten or unheard Tiger stories. I think that is a lot to offer people.
Very cool. Well, looking forward to that. And hopefully between now and April 19th, coming to a Starbucks near you on Washington Road. But
I will not be, unfortunately.
Well, a shame. But either way, I'll have to catch up with you at some point. But always great talking to you, Sean. I really appreciate the time. And, looking forward to the rest of the season following you on Twitter.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks, Nathan.